Hi, everyone. You've now heard the breaking news that a new pope has been chosen, and I'm going to have a conversation briefly with Mr. Mark Shriver, who has written a book about the papacy and about our last pope. But I want to give you, before we bring him in, just a little bit of background on who this new pope is. Robert Francis Prevost is the 267th pope and the first ever American. He's 69 years old and from Chicago and spent much of his career as a missionary in Peru. Um, to the extent that I'm able to understand, he's posted on X a number of messages that seem to be critical of the president's policy on mass deportation, seems to have spoken in favor of peace in Ukraine and against racism. But we're going to discuss that. He has now become the leader of 1.4 billion Roman Catholics and has chosen the papal name of Leo XIV. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Mark Shriver, who is president of Don Bosco Cristo Rey High School, just outside Washington, D.C. He's the past president of the Save the Children Action Network and wrote the book Pilgrimage, My Search for the Real Pope Francis, an intimate look at our last pope, Pope Francis, and his faith. Mark, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks for having me on, Jessica. Nice to be with you.
So I'm curious, what were the first thoughts that went through your head when you heard, A, they'd chosen a pope so quickly, and B, it's an American?
I mean, I think everybody was stunned. I think, all the gossip, all the conversation leading up to it was they were never going to choose an American because America had too much money, had too much power on the global stage, so that they were going to take somebody from the peripheries. As Pope Francis often talks about, he talks about a church that's a field hospital, that is an effort to be on the margins, to be not in the main capitals and in the sources of power, but he talks about a church that was on the margins. So to pick an American is pretty stunning. But as I've read more about him, it kind of makes sense. Here was a guy that lived in Peru for over 20 years, who speaks Italian, who speaks Portuguese, Italian and Spanish, and obviously English. Even though he is from America, he's obviously spent a lot of time in very poor parts of the world, understands what people who are struggling are dealing with on a day in and day out basis. And his first comments I thought were terrific. I mean, he says, "Peace be with you." And then he says, "God loves everyone unconditionally. Evil will not prevail." Like Francis, Francis is obviously been named after Francis of Assisi, who was attuned to the environment and to peace. He talks about peace, and he talks about unconditional love. And so many conversations in America have been around, we got to focus just on our family, on our immediate future, just what's going on in America. He is talking about unconditional love. He's talking about a different vision of the world. And I think that's very similar to what Pope Francis talked about.
So you really do see him as continuing the legacy of Francis, which was very much a message of compassion and peace, as opposed to violence and sort of exclusionary type borders, all the trends we're seeing now.
I think, in what I've read about him, there's clearly a commitment. Pope Francis's big commitment was to mercy, was to not just giving more to people that were struggling, to the poor, but to really live and to share their journey. It's a different vision of mercy than when I first, thought about it. But as I read his speeches, Francis, and his talks, he's talking about mercy. This guy's motto is around unity. And I'll probably butcher it a little bit. It says, "Although we are Christians, are many, in one Christ we are one." So he talks about unity. He's talking about peace. He's talking about unconditional love. I think those themes are very consistent with what Francis talked about through his papacy. And when he was a cardinal in Argentina, he talked about going to the peripheries, about bringing people together, about a vision of love that isn't exclusionary, that isn't just focused on your family or, as I said, or your neighborhood, but on an expansive vision, which is different than what the vice president talked about a couple of weeks ago.
Right. And, you're right there, right outside Washington, D.C. Your family's no stranger to politics. So it's quite striking to me that as pre-papacy, he literally tweeted or X'd or whatever you want to call it, saying to J.D. Vance, sort of correcting him about immigration. Essentially Jesus was an immigrant. He's marked on Ukraine that, the amount of blood spilled is a great tragedy, and the church would like to step in and help bring peace. He's spoken out about racism. Do you think that there's a way in which his selection is almost meant as a global counterbalance to what we're seeing from the Trump administration?
I think the Cardinals are aware of what's going on all across the world. They obviously are representing their own diocese, whether it's Washington, D.C. or somewhere, halfway across the world. And I think that they see a rise of nationalism and a vision that isn't as expansive as the message that Jesus called for. I mean, look, Jesus was a radical. There's a reason they hung him on a cross. He talked about loving your enemies. He talked about, what good is it if you only love those that love you? He talked about a different vision of family when he was told that his mother and brothers were outside waiting for him. He said, "Who are my mothers and brothers?" Everybody is a part of the global, the family that God envisions and that Jesus envisions. So, they're putting a guy up there that's not afraid to retweet that article that talked about a different vision of love than what the vice president talked about. And they've put a guy in there who's come from the peripheries, even though he's from Chicago, which in many cases is seen as not the periphery of the world, but he spent years and years in Peru. And he's traveled through Central and South America. So I think we've got a guy in here that's going to push that message that Jesus pushed. And that doesn't often rub people the right way because it's radical. I mean, I don't know too many people that love their enemies. Arthur Brooks famously said, talked about loving your enemies up on Capitol Hill in a prayer breakfast. And President Trump, this was in the first presidency, stood up and said, "Arthur, I disagree with you. You're not supposed to love your enemies." So, this guy's going to talk about a different vision of love and a different vision of the world. And I think it's exciting.
Yeah.
Really exciting. And it's the first American ever. I mean, how crazy is that? If you had bet that in Vegas a couple of days ago, you would have made a lot of money.
Do you think we'll hear him speaking English ever? And will he still have a Twitter account?
As you know, the Pope had a Twitter account in a bunch of different languages. And the Pope, understood the power of symbols. He was from Argentina. He was, lived through the Perón years and understood the value of pictures and obviously words as well. And I don't think that will get lost on this gentleman. And his name, we haven't even talked about his name, Leo the 14th. Leo the 13th was, by all accounts, the Pope that really pushed forward Catholic social teaching and pushed forward the power of unions and of the importance of a job and a good paycheck and living conditions. So again, the symbolism is not, it's important.
Is that almost a populist? Is it a populist kind of message?
I don't think cardinals and I don't think Pope Francis looked at it as conservative versus liberal, as Republican versus Democrats. We all try to, in America, I think, put us all in boxes.
Yeah.
And it's not a box. These guys, these two gentlemen, let me put it that way, excuse me. These two gentlemen, I think, just have an expansive view like Jesus did of what our communities could look like, what our family structure could look like, in the sense of love dominating it all. Again, peace be with you. And then God loves everyone unconditionally. Evil will not prevail. I mean, if you believe that God loves everybody, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, whether you're gay or straight or black or white, or whether you live in Israel or America or Australia, it's a pretty revolutionary idea. And I think that's what he's pushing. So, people will want to call it progressive, conservative, whatever. It's pretty exciting.
It is exciting. And it's such a pleasure to hear you explain it. I've learned a lot from you just now. You have a lucky group of kids there.
Thank you. You're very kind. I don't know about that, but I appreciate the nice words. Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Your book is called, can I just tell people one more time, Pilgrimage, My Search for the Real Pope Francis?
It is, yes. And it was a fun journey. I was spending about 3 years trying to figure out who he was, meeting his friends and detractors, which there were a few in Argentina and in Rome. He was a great teacher, Pope Francis. Didn't tell you the answer, made you struggle with, and grapple with the definition of love, with what it meant to be merciful, what it meant to be engaged in the margins. And I think, I hope Leo will do the same thing.
So beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and for your time today.
Thanks for having me.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Yeah. And to everybody else, send this out. What a beautiful message that was. I just felt calmed listening to him speak. I don't know. Did you feel that too? And exciting to hear this new Pope's take on our world right now and what he'll bring to the global stage. I'm going to send this out as a separate newsletter so you can watch this again or share it with folks. And I'll share the name of his book so you can find it as well. We'll continue to report on this breaking news and on all the other news, both here and on Instagram. And the latest Calm News podcast will be out next week. We took a week off this week while the We Can Do Hard Things team is on tour. I agree. Somebody said what did you say? Very powerful message. Beautiful. I agree. Okay, see you soon.